you considered the messages your outfits send? What do you think your clothes say about you? See, style is about the clothes, but it's not really about the clothes. Every day you make choices about what you're going to wear, but what are you communicating? Welcome to Above and Beyond Style. I'm your host, Maria DiLorenzo, and in 2019, I founded MFD Style, where I provide a unique, intuitive approach to personal styling for those ready to embrace a more meaningful look. With this podcast, I'll uncover key elements of where spirituality, psychology, and style intersect, revealing how you can make intentional wardrobe choices that reflect who you really are. So let me ask you, are you ready to transform into your authentic self? Then it's time. Come with me on this journey, and together we'll take your style above and beyond style.
Hello. Welcome back to Above and Beyond Style. This is your guest host, Dr. Melissa Carrick. I am here interviewing Maria DiLorenzo, stylist extraordinaire, your normal host, about her life, her story, and the next right step. Maria, I am so stoked to be here again with you, continuing our conversation and this awesome opportunity to interview you and have you share your story with all of your listeners. So let's get to it. It sounds like you weren't doing this in a vacuum, that you very much had companions on the path, much as you accompanied these college students. You had trusted people with you, or sort of, I almost think about it as like, and the reference here is unintentional, but it serves a different purpose. It's interesting. It's like you were running a marathon and you had people along different like half mile markers holding up a sign for you, being like, yay, go, or this way, you can do it, supporting this evolution that you were on.
I'm grateful that I had people that were like, yeah, go follow that. But I had my fair share of critics, which I don't fault anybody for that, because everyone's bringing their own experience and their own perspectives into how they might give you an opinion or offer advice. But it was learning to hear all of those different voices and feel the support in whatever way they were trying to offer it to me, but also allowing that own knowing within myself about like, I don't know, do I have to just follow or listen to what's outside of me? Or am I going to pay attention to this inner something that is like, keep going? And so I think the more I did that, the more people showed up with the signs that was like, keep going, you're doing it. So call that self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't know what you want to name that. Is it the universe trying to continue to encourage and give us signs? Sure. I mean, all of it makes sense. I definitely had people, and I'm lucky that I had people that were like, go for it, see what happens. And I had plenty of people being like, go for it, see what happens. I would never do that. Right? I'm sure anybody can relate to that kind of conversation.
Which is like, not exactly a vote of confidence when that happens.
No, right. And so you're like, okay, well, am I some kind of unique unicorn that can somehow make this work, but you can't? I don't know. It elicits all sorts of questions when people bring that forward. But I had to learn that it was okay that people had their own doubts about whatever I was doing. And I think friends in my life still have their own doubts about like what I'm up to. But I'm grateful for the willingness. And I think this speaks to true friendship or, family relations, or where there's really love active in the relationship, that people can see me and see what I've done and the choices I've made and still keep cheering me on, even if it's not the thing they would do. And I've come to a really good place about that. I think before it would kind of scare me, like, well, if so-and-so thinks this is a bad idea or that they would never do it, like, why do I think I would do this or be successful? So it is a really interesting place of like, are you going to listen to that narrative, that voice, the ego, whatever you want to name it in your mind, that can be very activated and very convincing? Or are you going to kind of flip it and turn in a little bit and say, okay, self, like, we know ourselves better than anyone. And can we see ourselves giving this a shot? It's going to take some bravery. It's going to take some courage. We don't have the outcomes. There's not a plan to follow. This is not scripted. Can you give yourself enough trust and embrace this unknowing, even if there are people that might not see this working out for you?
So really it's like leaning into that little voice, or you mentioned two separate things. You said, your the internal, but you said like leaning into how it feels in your body.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned signs, almost like external signs. So are those your two big ways, or just kind of like what's either did that process look like for you as you were building that muscle? And then really interesting to hear like what's that like today? Because as you said, you're still on the path, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're taking the steps and have built certainly a muscle or kind of gained like, found your stride in this.
Kind of like, when you're lifting weights, I don't have strong upper body muscles. And I can remember when I first started to lift, I was like on the lowest setting of whatever the particular machine is, and learning to kind of build up, right? Like that first felt hard, and then you did it for a week or two, and then you could increase the weight and you could do a little bit more. That's basically how it felt doing this. Like it's difficult to describe the feeling in your body, but it was starting to learn the language of my own body and listening to some of the signs within myself that I had very much dismissed or pushed down or just disregarded. Not that I didn't believe they were valuable, but we're taught that there's more confidence in what the mind thinks versus what the body thinks. And I had a couple people in my life that were very instrumental in helping me learn to sort of push the mind to the side. Not that it didn't serve a purpose or it wasn't useful, but to learn to listen within myself differently than I had before, and to, like any language, interpret what that language was saying. That helped me as I gradually learned more about what made me feel good, or it does need to feel like more and more this like 1, 2, 3, 4 step number 5, more and more my life feels like, I was just supposed to do the right next thing. And that's all I'm being asked to do. So before I get too ahead of myself about how am I going to pay my health insurance and how am I going to get my car, and like all the narratives that can keep people stuck and locked in, it was just trusting that I'll take the right next step and those things will fall into place. Not perfectly. This is not utopia, but it will give me the right steps to keep me, exercising that muscle of courage and bravery and knowing stuff.
Well, it's interesting that the language that you're using, it's very, very much essentially you're becoming a conversation partner or a friend to yourself, or it's learning how in your own life, how, whether we call it your spirit, your soul, your heart speaks to you, and to listen to that, which just like any friendship, conversation is part of what bonds that friendship and moves it forward. And it's also interesting to me. We'll say for the purpose of this conversation, the heart, and as a fan of Chinese medicine, right? The idea of in Chinese medicine, we have the head, we have a whole bunch of different centers of the body, and the heart is almost the most important and the most sacred. And the heart should be, as they say, on the throne. And the heart should be on the throne because it rules and gives its wisdom like any sort of traditional ruling figure, not necessarily speaking to this in our current times. But the heart should actually rule all the other systems and give its wisdom to that. So you're learning really how to deepen your listening and putting language to what those signs are for you, which may look different to someone else.
Yes.
And the critical part of that is interesting. It's kind of like, if you were to start studying French, you would learn a few words conversationally, then you learn verb conjugation, and then you're reading maybe a little bit, you can converse slowly. But if you go to France, like you can't just pick up a book on French and then all of a sudden be like, okay, I'm in France and I'm fully immersively conversive. That's not how it works. I actually I had a chance, I don't know if I told you this. I had a chance to be a team doctor at the Pan American Games, and I was assigned to the Venezuelan team. So on the plane ride to Brazil, I had studied French. On the plane ride to Brazil, where those Pan American Games were, I literally got my clinical Spanish book and pretty much crammed Spanish. And I can tell you, I mean, how that worked out for me. Thank God I had some clinical phrases, but it was absurd. And I'm like, okay, like looking in my little thing, and I got to be able to speak a little bit of clinical Spanish of be, basically saying like, well, where's the pain? Show me this range of motion. Turn over. Does this hurt? But by no means was I fully able to communicate with the clinical sensitivity and skill set that I have now, being
Sure.
fluent in not only English language, but the body language, clinical language, all of that. So it's interesting. And for you, part of what you do, I would say almost part of your secret sauce is actually the listening and the naming.
Mm.
And not only doing that with your clients, but helping them, reflecting back at them as, again, as an accompanying partner or conversation partner in this language or this milieu of style. It's like you're entering into a whole different world and reflecting back. And I know for me, it was really powerful to have those language, those specific naming words for that and building my own muscles. So I'm curious, I will say, you've described yourself as type A, but now I'm not type A anymore, or sort of recovering type A. And I know the name of your business in terms of Above and Beyond Style, the name of the podcast, Above and Beyond Style.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so curious if you had to pick a moniker for yourself now. And I think this is actually a helpful exercise for all of us of like, I get asked all the time, what do you really do? Because Doc, you're not really a chiropractor. And I have my thing that I say in terms of, well, I was traditionally trained as a chiropractor and I've studied blah, 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 blah. And really what I do is blah, here's the thing. So for you, and a starting point, if it helps of like, okay, if you're not type A, I mean, are you B plus? Are you, what's the moniker if you had to give a label? Because we know labels are not meant to restrictively, constrictively define. They're what we expand into as a helpful hint for the evolution of where we are now.
Gosh, that's such a good question. And I think part of why I'm struggling to answer is because I'm still so in it. And kind of, let's say, rebrand or give myself, some sort of new nickname or whatever, that like where people are on their own journey, right? And help them come to an appreciation of both self and body, like in their physical body, because clothing obviously has to do with that. Kind of active in the last, I don't know how many months, close to a year now, where I have learned to sort of create space. It's more than just the physicalness of creating space, because that's actually part of the process. That I'm also creating this mental and heart spaciousness for myself and with people. It feels like, and it goes hand in hand with the expanding energy, right? So somebody like a type A or recovering type A, someone who loved the predictability, who really loves and thrives on routine, there are still very much aspects of that in my personality. If you're astrology people, I have a Virgo moon and a Virgo rising, which means like I love me some order. I love cleanliness and tidiness and specificity. Like there is a very deep thread in me that loves that that's where for so long, I think that ruled how I've made choices and how I've run like my lifestyle choices and my business. Whereas now that spaciousness or the expanding is like, I don't ignore those things. I like some aspects of that preciseness in my personality. I think it helps actually facilitate and keep me going in some ways. But if I'm a type B plus, it's because I've created space. I've allowed for the crumbs on the floor. I've allowed for, the cobwebs in the ceiling, or, the things that they still kind of drive me nuts because I am who I am. But it has given me more space, a little detachment from it. So it doesn't have to be the end all be all of how I operate and live. And so when I've been able to embrace more of that within my own self, there's much more compassion and softness and gentleness with not only how I think I can show up for clients, but how I can be toward myself. Because I'm sure you can imagine someone who is that precise about basically everything, how hard I can be on myself when it's not done well or something goes wrong or I didn't anticipate something I thought I should have seen. Or, there's a whole narrative that can take me down a very dark, spirally, twisty place that was never good for me. And so being able now to kind of flip it and sort of see where I've I've let go of some of that stuff. And I can even just, as I'm saying it to you right now, my body feels relaxed. And it's like, there's relief in that. That's like, thank God you've let go of some of that because it kept me sick or it got me sick or it kept me stressed or.
It's interesting, Maria. I think maybe the first time I recall, I don't know if it was when we first met, but it was definitely maybe more first encounter. We were both running a half marathon
Yes.
and with one of our friends and my sister. And I think if I recall, that might have been around the time when your father passed.
He had just been diagnosed.
Okay,
Yeah.
so he had
Yeah.
just been diagnosed. So knowing that there was a bunch of stuff going on. And what's interesting is like knowing you then, and granted, I mean, running a half marathon and training, that is like, not necessarily always going to be the time when people are most themselves or most
Mm,
joyful. And I just think about the contrast of who you have evolved into or grown into. Spaciousness, really. I mean, one of my mentors, Dr. Scott Walker, always says success is a shedding process.
yeah.
And I think about that success, right? If we're putting that in air quotes, it's also becoming more of ourselves. I think actually is the undressing of certain things that no longer fit, certain things that, like the red blazer that
Yes.
I wore, not my truck, but the red blazer that I wore. That is not me. No, thank you. Um, Also, my MBTs, well, maybe they had a little bit of me in them, but like not a full expression
Mhm.
of who I am. So moving more into and the shedding of that, and what I see, if I can reflect on the contrast,
Please.
is someone who's a lot lighter because you're following the call or the vocational, the interest, the things that spark that joy, the things that, not to be cliched, but really the things that are thoroughly you. So it's like, my patient who wears cowboy boots, it's doing the things that you like to do, exploring. Okay, yes, higher ed, there were beautiful things in that for you, and there were some things that weren't an accurate expression of you in the world. And we've had a little bit of this conversation, but I like to think it's not the how do, right? It's the who do. So
Mhm.
it's like the who you are, and you get to who you are by that listening on the inside and by building that muscle of doing the things that are more thoroughly you
Mhm.
in that.
I follow this one astrologer and kind of psychic, I think he would call himself. And he talks about this. I love language and much like you, like appreciate the right word. And he talked about who you be comes. So who you become, right? So that concept of like who you becomes. And so it's like you're sending forth this intention, this purpose, whatever of who you be so that it will come and be of essence in your life. And that has always really resonated with me because I don't know that I've always honored who I be, right? And so no wonder why what came maybe was out of alignment at times. And so when I've really started to, in many ways, I think remember who I've always been. It's not a like a severing of my personality or anything of that space, but it's really been this more integrated space of like, oh, that's who I've always been. So the more I've come to really like love that version or that essence and spirit of me, the more that comes really reflects that. So there's this very energetic exchange between who I be and what comes. And that I think that kind of summarizes a lot of what you're saying.
It so does. I've never even thought about that. And as someone who likes wordplay for sure, and the theology nerd in me, that's near and dear, something that stuck with me from Carl Rahner is always, right, the being and the becoming.
Yes. Yes.
And when I sit with a patient or someone just generally someone in front of me or even a dear friend. It's like, I remember writing actually to my husband in our early years. We wrote letters for a
Mm.
long time, actual handwritten letters. And this concept of the being and becoming, and it's like not only loving the being that's there, but loving the becoming that is like with that. And
Yeah.
that's like loving the evolution that is there. And it's not trying to make him or anyone else into who they
Right.
are, but it's seeing essentially the seminal essence and not presuming that I can see someone's entire seminal essence, but that you can see that thing there. And I would imagine it's much the same in the process that you.
For me at least, it didn't really resonate until it resonated. And I can't say that there was any one thing that got me to that place, but I can notice there was a tipping point. There was a shift where that started to really resonate and make sense to me. And it was as if my body was like, yeah, okay. And the more I leaned into that and believed it, it was like all these other things started to kind of open up. And that's where that spaciousness really is so active right now. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. I don't know that I saw that, or I didn't know that that was coming, or, whatever it was. That the more I've allowed for that spaciousness and that remembering to become, it has been a much more peaceful existence. It is interesting to reflect back to that half marathon, I think was 2009. And it was the fall of, I had learned just that summer that my dad was diagnosed. And so it was, I think, September of 2009, we ran that race. So just a few months in, and I remember running with our mutual friend, and I cried, I think, the entire race. And I was just sobbing this entire race, and which is not particularly healthy or helpful when you're trying to get through 13 miles. But so I remember we finished much after you and your sister. Because there was a lot of like stopping and starting and having to like get myself pulled together. And it is an interesting place to reflect back now and feel like where the cohesion has really started to happen. And I mean, again, that was however many, 14 years ago, that, being able to sort of see the evolution, 14, 15 years now, see the evolution of how that's come to be, and proud of that, because it's not an overnight circumstance. And I will be interesting to see in another 14 or 15 years, what does that Maria look like there? And what is she doing? And like, how is she living? And what is she embracing? And that's a beautiful part of evolution, I think.
For sure. And the being, right? Who you be, and that you're infusing that into your work. And so with that, really, I mean, there's so many more questions. And I can't help but really think about this thread, right? So even just talking about the half marathon and talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, and right, the sequencing of that you saw those numbers everywhere. They
Oh
just
my
kept
God.
showing up, and learning the language for you of interpreting, well, what does that mean? What's that saying to me? And the narrative then developing around it. And then, of course, with this season, I can remember literally I was on the cliffs where you're about to head. I was in Encinitas, so right outside San Diego, and walking on the cliffs and talking about the possibility of this season and not knowing what it would be about. And just being like, Maria, it's season 5. Like, that's the next in the sequence, right? 5.
Oh my
And I can
gosh.
tell you exactly where I was standing with that. And it's not lost on me that we were walking, right? And
Mhm.
one of my first memories of you is running the half marathon. And so I've been thinking about this as the idea of gait, right?
Mm,
So someone's gait really is like they're walking, and how their legs and arms
mm,
naturally move in sequence. And there is so much neurology that is firing off unconsciously all the time
mm,
with gait. And the interesting thing about gait, right, is if you think about the physiology of it, right, it's like the bicep and tricep are firing at the same time. Certain muscles are turning on, certain muscles are turning off. And you can tell something is wrong with someone neurologically if their gait's off. The other
mm,
interesting thing, right? So if someone is like not really swinging one arm, and not because they're carrying a bag or anything else, it's actually they have something going on with their brain, right? It's a cognitive signaling. Same thing if somebody's dragging one foot a little bit or has
mhm.
foot drop, that's an indicator, right? It's a neurological indicator for something going on at a spinal level. So it's also interesting to me that gait is unconscious. And so I really love looking at the physiology, the wisdom within the physiology, like you're saying, leaning into what's the body saying.
Mm-hmm.
And just like in nature, right, the nature of our physiology is that, even with gait, if you stop and think, I mean, I can't tell you, there's some certain tests that I have patients do where I have them march in place, opposite arm, opposite leg, which incidentally is a great thing to reset you if you feel funky or you feel like your brain's off, to do a cross crawl, opposite arm, opposite leg. But so many times patients, I mean, they totally screw it up when they
Mm.
first try and do it. So gait, it's like if you think too hard about something, you screw
Yeah.
it up. It's kind of like what's the SNL skit? Mary Catherine Gallagher. Do you remember
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Right, walking with the arm, like not moving. Yeah, or the
Yes.
so right, this iconic thing. And it's like it's true. If you think too hard, so it's striking this balance of reflection and not thinking too hard about the gait, right? The steps, like one,
Mm.
two, three, four. It's like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like that happens. It's just like keeping time in music. It's this rhythm in that. So we don't want to think too hard about it because
Mm-hmm.
some of it is naturally do the next right step. It's the next movement of the foot. You have paralysis when you stutter, you stumble when you think too hard about it. The brain doesn't really work. So all of that being said, in this, since that was January, I believe that we spoke when I was on the
Mm-hmm.
cliffs. So I'm curious, like now we're in month 5. So the synergy of that,
No
obviously not
coincidence.
lost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what were some of the step fives? And we could say 6, 7, and 8 might have happened, or the repetition of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over the past few months, over this season. What's shifted for you? What realm have you walked into with this gait pattern and observing
Mm.
the attention to just do number 5, and probably having that even more front of consciousness for you?
Yeah. And some of them, this is a great question because some of them are really minute and very, very small. So it is that like half degree versus the 1 degree even. Um, some of it was, that I sold my home and I've been kind of in this transition space with where I've been living. And for the better part of this last year, I've actually been living with someone else out of their great generosity and hospitality. And so within these last 5 months, I actually made a shift to being back by myself.
Mm.
And I do think there was something to that. While that may feel like more of a 1 degree, it was actually fairly minute in this way because the shift from moving where I'd been living alone for many years, 15 plus years, to having quote unquote roommates and then back to being alone. The back to being alone was a very small shift. It wasn't as big a shift as it was living with people. What I mean by that is, things that have lingered for a really long time. Stuff that I've needed to kind of see in a different way, understand about myself, understand about my family of origin, like things that I think have helped inform basically the person that I am. And seeing it with sort of a different perspective now of being able to appreciate it, but also being able to let go of some old stuff that I didn't need to hang on to anymore. And so I would say really the last 3 months have been very intentional about a lot of inner release and healing and checking in and being able to communicate then more actively with God, spirit, universe, however you want to name that entity or that source. And having what I loved, what you started to say, was having a relationship with this other entity that even in my like deepest academic study of theology, and I'm like doing all this work in this spiritual space, and I was in formal ministry for many years of my career. I don't think I ever really understood relationship the way I understand relationship now with, let's call it spirit or God. These last several months, the right next step was spending more time in relationship with God and finding a whole new language, a whole new like any human relationship, learning to understand one another a little differently and appreciate certain things about each other. And yes, I'm sort of personifying this God spirit energy, but I think it's much bigger than any kind of manifestation or incarnation energy. And so that has given me an entirely different appreciation for maybe the larger steps I want to take, like spending the summer in San Diego, saying yes to that invitation and opportunity that came up for me, being able to say yes to an investment in my business that I've been kind of noodling on for a while and figuring out some key components of the work that I want to sort of bring together, but needing assistance and recognizing that. So sort of that right next step, like really kind of came together over these last several months. And then the last piece I would say has been around my energy is a little different than I think a lot of people's energy. And I know we share this in our human design categorization. I don't know the right name for it, but there as a projector, so I'm a projector in the human design, I recognize so much that my energy is something that really needs to be protected and responded to in a very gentle and specific way that basically my whole life I've not honored. Only within this last, I mean, yes, this last year, but really more in this last 5 months. I would say even like when I went to Europe, from that point on, there has been a very different appreciation for how I need to rest and operate to be available in the world. And that right next step has meant not literally taking any steps. It's meant just being. For someone who's trying to build a business and actively thrive in other places and ways in your life, it sort of feels a little bit like, what's going on here? Is this a little lazy? Are you not like, why aren't you taking the quote unquote step? And actually, the step was to not take a step. That has been a really interesting space to be in over these last few months.
And Maria, I mean, you said that that's a half degree. It's again, I think this is like case in point, right? It's the reflection, like actually taking the reflective moment to see how far, how far or what is there.
Yeah.
And how much, again, that changed the course, taking that moment or saying yes to that next step of like living by yourself has changed the course. Okay, San Diego, investing in your business, something that you've been like noodling on for, you'd said a year, two, maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
And it calls to mind two things. One, one of my favorite poets is Hafiz.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about this. My husband proposed to me with a Hafiz poem. So Hafiz being a mystic, right? And he says something like, you wander from room to room, hunting for the diamond necklace that is already around your neck. It's just this idea of like, oh, the step 5 that's right there, and it's that invitation, and then, oh, wait a second, here I am, and from there, the listening, or the shimmering, the sparkle, the prism, the crystallization, whatever it is, like then it shows up, the brilliance shows up right there, which then harkens to mind someone I think near and dear to both of us, of Emily P. Freeman, and talking about the stillness. And I was reading something about, oh God, it was so good. I wish I had the exact line with me. But basically, she was talking about how we get so far ahead of ourselves. We run down the road, right? There it is again, like running down the road so far ahead of us. And we start thinking about, okay, not just the laundry, but okay, let me think about, it's May. I need to be thinking about when school starts. I need to be thinking about Christmas break, that we forget to even pay attention to the present because we're so far ahead in the future that we've imagined. We forget the past that's actually there, or something like that. I should find the actual line. It's so brilliant. And she recently released, I don't know if you've heard this, The Path, that poem. So The Path by Lynn Ungar. And I want to read a line from that, just because, not to be a complete spoiler, it's worth the read of the whole poem. But looking about when you're walking down the road and there is no road ahead, there's only the walking, the tales we weave of our adventures and the songs we sing to call our companions on. And the idea is, right, it is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. and so forth. And the repetition of that gait when you're thinking about even that song, like the ants go marching, right? It's like we do that and then we reflect on it and we see and we can tell the story and we can offer that up to ourselves to learn
Mhm.
from or to guide our future. We can offer it up to others and share it.
Yeah.
But that's all there is. And we're such a future oriented culture. And it's that idea of anxiety, right? Anxiety is when we're future oriented all the time. So I would basically wonder if for our listeners, can we look at just take a few moments of like, jot down a few notes, even if it's in your phone. Where have you been the past 5 months? What's
Mm.
transpired? What's different the past 5 months? Right? Nature, there's always something different and always
Totally.
something that's going on. And then in this theme of spaciousness, which really is about connecting with self and having that relationship. So looking at what would it take to have one small step of spaciousness in one's own life?
Mm.
Would that be just shutting your bedroom door when you're getting dressed? Would that be, let me actually, instead of slamming down my smoothie, can I just sit and drink my smoothie and actually taste it in the morning, or my eggs, or whatever you do, where you're actually present? Would it be like leaning over my food and actually smelling it before I eat, to have that kind of like holy sacred moment or that embodied moment to get more in touch? Like those are the small revolutionary acts of spaciousness that then step towards the evolution
Mm.
of, okay, this relationship of self, this spaciousness, this awareness that brings a little bit of that reflective moment into our life, where most of us don't always have that built in. So I would, for now, like close with that. I don't have, if
Yeah.
there's anything else you want to mention, Maria, I will turn it over to you. Thanks for being so willing to answer my unscripted, unprecedented, unpreviewed questions and speak so candidly about your experience. I really appreciate your generosity in that.
I'm so grateful for one, the opportunity to be able to share a little bit more. I think sometimes having it more conversational is easier to tell the story as opposed to just laying it out there. So I am grateful for your willingness to be in this flipped script space. And I love how you've sort of left us with this challenge or this invitation to think about where can spaciousness maybe be the right next step. And if it's a very small thing for you and it feels maybe very big to create whatever that is for yourself, but at least let me be some form of evidence that if you're willing to do that, you might be surprised and really delighted by what you might find when you give yourself that time and space. And I'm still very much on the road of that. So don't let me fool you and tell you that every day is like that. But I am learning the kind of the dance of how spaciousness can reveal to us. So I'm very grateful for your contribution. You're thinking about these topics with me, Missy. And for all of you listening, this is actually wrapping up season 5. We have spent so much good time, I think, thinking about these right next steps. And this is a perfect way to kind of conclude this season and allow you to think about where your right next step might be. And if spaciousness is involved in that for you, how that might open up some new doors and new ways of thinking or connecting with yourself. That to me feels like kind of the biggest, best outcome of all of it. So friends, we'll be back, definitely back for season 6, hopefully later this calendar year. But in the meantime, continue to enjoy these episodes and thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed what you've heard, I would appreciate you taking the time to leave a review on the podcasting platform you're using and share this episode with others who you think might really enjoy these conversations about personal style. For more information all about MFD Style services, you can find me on the web at mfdstyle.com, on Instagram at mfd_style, where I post almost 5 days a week, or send me an email at maria@mfdstyle.com. I also have a weekly email I send to subscribers, so I will include the link to that sign up in the show notes. So until next time, friends, remember to love yourself and then love yourself some more.